so that made it more clear.
I'd like to call the December 10th regular meeting of the Post Falls Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Will you please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone. Just a reminder, please silence your cellular device, and we will go ahead and get things rolling. Go ahead and take roll call.
Stephenson.
Here.
Carey.
Here.
Kimball.
Present.
Davis.
Here.
Latham.
Here.
Bishop.
Here.
Hampy.
Here.
All right, all present and accounted for. Amendments to the agenda this evening. Mr. Manley, do we have anything?
None.
No amendments. Ceremonies, announcements, appointments, and presentations. Mr. Cafferty, are you going to share
No,
with us? No.
but I don't have any announcements, but I would take this opportunity for a bit of clarification due to some unforeseen circumstances. Item 4 on your agenda, the public hearings, A, B, C, and D. Because they do not say action item next to them, we won't be voting on those this evening, but we will be conducting the hearings and deliberations. We will be continuing the final deliberations to a later date, as yet unknown, when the body is available to reconvene to make the final determination on those. But we will, because these are on the agenda and all the people and all the interested parties are here this evening, we will be conducting the hearings. We just won't be making a final decision this evening. And so at the conclusion of the hearings, the commission is free to, and I would encourage them to, discuss the matter. But then once you finish your discussion, I wouldn't recommend that you make a recommendation or a motion to approve any specific zoning at this time.
Okay.
Is that confusing enough for everyone?
I think it makes sense, just so everyone is clear, because there is not an action item on there, we will not be making the final determination. And so, commissioners, just remember when it comes time, after we go through all the process, we hear rebuttal and everything else, we deliberate, we have our conversation. The only motion that I would be looking for is a motion to close that public hearing. And I do know that the city is working on a schedule for us to go ahead and make a ruling on those 4. So that's what we're looking for tonight.
And I didn't make it clear because I forgot, I apologize. The state law requires that it say action item for anything that you're going to vote on, and so that's why we're not able, or you're not able to make a decision tonight, but we will forward that on and move forward with that. So.
And I'm guessing the applicants are already aware of this?
Yes, they've been informed.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Cafferty, I appreciate it. All right, declaration of conflict. Any conflict we need to be made aware of this evening? Seeing none? Okay, then we'll go ahead and move on, looking at the consent calendar. Mr. Manley.
Yeah, item A is the meeting minutes from November 12th. Item B is the reasoned decision for the Idaho State Veterans Home, file number USE 4, 2019. Item C is the reasoned decision for the Highlands Home for Assisted Living, file number USE 5, 2019. And item D is the reasoned decision for the JB Dodge and Company annexation, the Macomber appeal. That would be it.
All right, and because it's not a public hearing and it is a consent calendar, I believe that we can have a motion on that. So if everyone had a chance to review the consent calendar, I would entertain a motion at this time.
I'll make the motion tonight to approve the meeting minutes from November 12th, 2019 as presented.
Second.
Okay, motion and second, call for vote.
Hampy.
Yes.
Bishop.
Yes.
Latham.
Yes.
Davis.
Yes.
Kimball.
Abstain?
Carey.
Yes.
Stephenson.
Yes.
Okay, this moves us on to the next issue of the evening, and that is citizen issues. This section of the agenda is reserved for citizens wishing to address the commission on an issue that is not on this evening's agenda. Comments on issues that are planned for future meeting agendas should also be held for that meeting. Do we have any citizen issues not tied to this evening? Seeing none, then we'll go ahead and move on. Mr. Manley, I believe we have no unfinished or old business, correct?
I have a question or rather a clarification for Commissioner Latham, who made the motion to approve the minutes. Was it also his intention to approve the rest of the consent calendar, meaning the reasoned decisions listed as B, C, and D on there.
Yes, thank you for
Okay.
pointing that out. That's fine.
Do we still have a second on that same motion?
Yes.
Are we good?
Yep, I just wanted to make clear that it was all approved.
We are all about the rules. Thank you, sir.
You bet.
No unfinished, no old business, so that brings us to item number 4, which are public hearings, and I believe that we are going to open up with the Daeland Properties Annexation file. Ethan, to present.
Good evening, Commissioners. Ethan Porter, Planner with the City of Post Falls, here to present the Daeland property annexation. This is case file ANNX-12-2019. We're looking at the owner being Daeland Incorporated, and the applicant is Dobler Engineering, who is here tonight to represent. The requested action tonight for the Planning and Zoning Commission is to, the applicant is asking you to review the annexation request of approximately 5 acres and to make a recommendation of the proposed Community Commercial Services, CCS, zoning designation to City Council. Here you can see the project is located in the red hatch here. We have Pleasant View Road running north and south directly adjacent to it, and then Southeast Way running east and west. They have Pleasant View Road as a minor arterial, and then Southeast Way is a principal arterial as well, just for your knowledge. Looking at the surrounding zoning for this proposal, we have the white parcels are the county, Kootenai County parcels. The red is commercial, and the gray is going to be industrial zoning. There is some residential to the southeast, further away from the property, but majority of it is surrounded by commercial, industrial, and county lands. So looking at the parcel, it's currently vacant with no significant topology or vegetation issues. The water and sewer provider would be the City of Post Falls. And then here we look at our the first 3 zone change review criteria, which I will go into more detail in the upcoming slides, but basically it discusses the consistency between the future land use map, consistency with the goals and policies found in the comprehensive plan, and then also considerations, as you can see there. Your staff report does go into more detail with those 2 if you want clarification. But looking at the future land use map, we see that it is designated as commercial, which is consistent with the future land use map for this proposal. So you can see the whole area around the intersection of Southeast and Pleasant View Road is going to be commercial as its future designation. Looking at some of the uses around, you have some of the industrial uses to the west. You have Boulder Park here to the east across Pleasant View, some vacant industrial lands to the south, and some other commercial industrial to the southeast, which would be compatible uses to a commercial zoning for this proposal. Looking furthermore, like I mentioned, the road classifications of minor arterial and a principal arterial, these are road classifications that do, they are compatible with a commercial use. So this would be consistent with the goals and policies in the comprehensive plan. Since it's not limited neighborhood commercial or lower density residential nor industrial zoning proposal, then the last 2 of these criteria would not be applicable in this situation. And there is projected to not be any future impacts with traffic patterns or anything regarding the road classifications with that as well. The agencies that were routed, we basically got the comments back from Kootenai County Fire and Rescue and the Post Falls Police Department, who both remain neutral on this proposal. And then these were the agencies that were routed to. And then I am here for any questions that you may have as of now.
Any questions for staff at this time? None?
So I do. I have a question. Last week, last month at our hearing, we were brought somebody who wanted to annex, and the property didn't touch anything. Does this actually touch?
It does on the south, so you see that Southeast Way, it's in the city limits right there. So you can see that here's the black line right there, that's city limits.
Okay.
And then right here is
Okay.
basically where it's touching.
Okay, so the road, okay.
Correct, we're
Okay.
good.
question.
So to clarify, Ethan, Saltese Way is within the city, and so that's how it's,
Yes, correct.
Okay, okay, yeah, that was my question, yes.
Good point, though.
Okay. Any other questions?
And that Celti's Way would carry, that has the utilities that would service that lot primarily, right?
Correct, yes. I
Okay.
believe and Rob Pauls, if he wants to comment more on that, he can, but.
So it wouldn't be a shoestring annexation?
Yes, it would not be a shoestring annexation in this case.
Did you do that on purpose? You did that on
I
purpose?
meant to say that.
Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Porter? Okay, thank you very much. Go ahead and have the applicant come up at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Pretty much the same thing, but I want to point out a few things. All right, here we go. Slideshow. Beginning, and we're excited. Okay, so you've seen this. That's where it is. Okay, there's the existing comp plan designation. You've seen that. We're going for commercial CC&S. We think that works well. There's the existing zoning and land use. Ethan touched on that. I have really nothing to add. Here's the existing zoning, Kootenai County. You might want to see that again, commercial. So we believe it's compatible. And then just a quick summary. Annexation facilitates managed growth for the comp plan policies. Economic development increases the city's economic base, ensures future land use is compatible with surrounding zoning and land use. And then more directly to a question the commission just asked, the annexation provides for extension of public infrastructure. So water and sewer are in the existing Celtice abutting the site. 2 roads, as pointed out, are collectors that have the capacity to serve commercial in this area and more. Because it's in the ACI, those properties are included in master planning for, parks, sewer, streets, the whole gamut. That's really it. Appreciate your time and certainly
I don't know if we got the
available
name and
for
address for
questions.
records.
What's that?
I don't know if we got.
Could you do name and address for the record? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I didn't do that.
You're fine.
Gordon Dobler, Dobler Engineering, 1875 North Lakewood.
Thank you, Mr. Dobler. Any questions? Thank you, sir. Okay. Public comment?
None.
None?
Nope.
For, neutral, or against, so there would be no need for rebuttal at this time. Commissioners, any questions for staff, applicant? Any engineering questions? Anything else that we need?
No.
Okay. Everybody has a good handle, mental snapshot as we discuss this at a later time? Okay, and I'd look for a motion to close this public hearing.
I move to close the public hearing on.
Okay.
Do I need to name
Yep.
it?
you can if you want.
I move to close the public hearing for the Daeland property annexation and ANNX 0012-2019.
Okay. So move, that one's closed. We will move on to the next item on this evening's public hearings. And again, Mr. Porter to present, we'll go ahead and open the Tedder Properties annexation.
Good evening again, Commissioners. Ethan Porter here, presenting the Tedder annexation. This is case file ANNX-13-2019. The owners is Tedder Properties LLC, and the applicant is H2 Surveying Engineering, which are here tonight to represent. We're looking, the applicant tonight is looking to ask the Planning and Zoning Commission to review the annexation request of approximately 10.1 acres and to make a recommendation for the single-family residential R1 zoning designation to City Council. Here you can see the project location is east of Greens Ferry Road over here, which runs north and south, and then East Ponderosa Boulevard, which is running, north and south for Greens Ferry, east and west for East Ponderosa Boulevard, which is a minor collector. The Centennial Trail also runs along East Ponderosa Boulevard as well, running east and west. So the property here in the red hatch you can see is next to is between East Ponderosa Boulevard and the Spokane River. There's currently 2 properties here, and Tedder Properties LLC owns both of these. So both properties are being proposed to annex into the city as R1. Looking at the parcel, it's vacant county land currently. It's sloped near the riverfront, more so than usual as far as what we'd see with kind of some elevations, and which I'll show you in the next slide. The water and sewer would be provided by the city of Post Falls. Again, here's a contour map kind of to show the elevation here, kind of the steepness of the slope. Currently, we've spoken with the city staff, and the applicant and owner have spoken, and basically they haven't found any issues with this slope and elevation difference based on the subdivision. When it comes through for subdivision and development, would be the time to kind of address that issue as well, if there is any. Currently, we haven't found any, so. Looking at the surrounding zoning, you can see that the yellow is R1 single-family residential, which is basically surrounding the subject site, and then to the west you have white parcels, which is county land as well. Primarily single-family county and vacant lots. Looking at the zone change review criteria, the first 3 basically is consistency again with the future land use map, the goals and policies, and the comprehensive plan, and further considerations for street classification, traffic patterns, existing development, and future land use, compatibility, geographic or natural features, which we kind of already touched on a little bit. And so looking at the future land use map, we can see it's designated as residential. This whole area is basically designated residential for the future land use map. So this is consistent, and it is compatible with the surrounding land uses as well, since the surrounding land uses are residential. It's also further away from any commercial or industrial corridor as well, so it meets the intent of the comprehensive plan, as not putting single-family residential in the urban core, essentially. So, let's see. The road classification, like I said, is a minor collector for East Ponderosa Boulevard, and lower density residential zoning is typically assigned, like I said, from properties away from the urban activity, the urban core, which it is. The road classification can manage the R1 single-family residential zone, so there's not an issue there as well. The other 2, sorry about that. The other 2, as far as it's not commercial industrial, we aren't looking at those review criteria, since this is only for R1 single-family residential zoning. Agencies that were routed, you can see here, and then the comments that we received from them are Post Falls Police Department, who remain neutral, as well as the Cooney County Fire and Rescue. Do you guys have any questions for me tonight?
Questions for staff? Okay. Thank you, sir. All right, invite the applicant up.
Good evening, Commission, staff. Scott MacArthur, H2 Surveying and Engineering, P.O. Box 2916, Hayden, Idaho, 83835. Pretty simple, straightforward, contiguous R1 zoning annexation request, unique piece of property, available city services, water, sewer. All your dry utilities are available in the right-of-way. The similar densities to the surrounding uses. It is a unique piece, as the city's pointed out, and we've worked with staff on sanitary sewer and water, how we're going to route this, how we're going to loop this, how we're going to make this work. So just taking the first step tonight. So it's contiguous R1. It's consistent with the comp plan. I don't know Ethan did a great job preparing a staff report. There's nothing else really to add other than answering any questions you guys might have.
Any questions for the applicant?
No.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
No public comment.
No public comment? Okay. No need for rebuttal. Any questions for anyone? Okay.
I'd move to close the public hearing for Tedder annexation, file ANNX 0013-2019.
Actually, before I click that, I needed a second.
Second.
Got super excited. Super excited.
Did you second?
Mr. Latham, did you second?
I did. Sam did.
Mr. Bishop, thank you. Okay. All right. Moving along to our next item. We'll go ahead and open the Tranquil Metal Annexation Subdivision.
I'm getting confused here. There we go. Good evening, Commissioners. John Manley, Planning Manager here at the City of Post Falls, presenting the Tranquil Meadows annexation and subdivision. Case files for the annexation would be the ANNX 14, 2019, and for the subdivision, the SUBD 18, 2019. So for this proposal, the applicant's requesting the Commission forward a recommendation of single-family R1 zoning as part of their annexation request to City Council. Additionally, you'll be reviewing a proposed subdivision on this 4.9 acres that will be contingent on your review of this proposed recommendation and the R1 zoning for 12 lots within that 4.9 acres. The landowner for this is Coca Land LLC, with the applicant being Dobler Engineering, which is here tonight to represent the applicant. The location of this is, as you see here, in the red hatched area. It's just west of the intersection of Chase and Prairie. It's about the 5th 5-acre lot just west of Chase Road. North of Craftsman Meadow Ridge. And there's currently a subdivision here at Howell and Prairie that's being developed, so it's just east of that. Current land use is large lot type acreage for residential development within Kootenai County. Physical characteristics is that there are no topography or vegetation issues. Water would be provided by East Green Acres, and you saw in your staff report that there was a will serve letter of that nature, with City of Post Falls providing a sewer. Looking at the surrounding zoning, as you see here, you have R1S to the south. What I did provide is an additional snipping from our GIS to kind of explain the picture a little bit about this area a little bit better than that zoomed in zoning map. So when you look in here, you have south of this site, the R1S without the hatch. That's R1S was intended to be 1-acre lots exclusively. What you see here in the R1S are developments that didn't meet that R1S and completed their development as part of a PUD. So directly south, you have the Craftsman Meadow Ridge, which developed as a PUD. And you see here what the average lots were for that application, for that development. That's approximately about 1/3 of an acre. The development on Howell and Prairie, that was once again was a PUD, and you see there the minimum lot size there was about for just under 8,000 square foot a lot. So the proposed R1 would be consistent or compatible with those adjacent development densities. And similar, if you look to the east, most of that development adjacent to Prairie Avenue is more of that R1 type development zoning district. So when you're looking at these proposals, we compare it to some 6 review criteria. And so the first 3 are kind of grouped together because you can talk about them conceptually, and I'll go into the following slides. But is it consistent with the future land use map? Consistent with the goals and policies within the comprehensive plan, which your staff report goes into some pretty good detail on the consistency. And then the third one is seeing if the proposal is consistent with street classifications, traffic patterns, existing development, and future land uses for this area, as well as community plans or geographic and natural features. This particular site has no specific community plan nor any geographic or natural features that would impede any development of this area. But going into the next slides here, I'll talk more into the first elements of those. So the future land use you see here as being residential, and their proposal would be consistent with the future land use designation. Looking at the transportation corridors and the traffic impact, the staff report went into a lot of detail on that, as its compatibility with Prairie Avenue being a principal arterial. Chase Road's a minor arterial. McGuire's a little further to the west, and Howell's adjacent, nearby to the west. So there's plenty of access and to gain access to a subdivision's development to this area. Prairie goes all the way to Highway 41 and then further to the west to either 53, or you can meander back down to Celtice Way if you want to. So access is plausible. Looking at existing development, as you see, the current development within the city of Post Falls wouldn't be considered incompatible with 5-acre lots, so there would be compatibility there. Nor with the future uses be incompatible with the future land use designations. Looking at the commercial and high-density residential zoning, that's typically for streets with higher road classifications. This right here, principal arterial is a high road classification, but this specific site isn't right near like an intersection of two, or maybe not necessarily be a great node, so for commercial or some multifamily. So the applicability of this would be appropriate, and with it being further away from other developments to the south. Limited neighborhood commercial and low density residential, typically assigned properties as they proceed further away from higher intense urban activity. Once again, I'll kind of dovetail a little bit. So we all know that Prairie Avenue is eventually going to be a 5-lane road. This is an interesting situation when you look in the future. Yeah, you have single-family homes that's next to a 5-lane road. It's not necessarily incompatible, but it's potential that down the road that there would be potentially some infiltration of some light or noise influences into a single-family subdivision next to a 5-lane road. So it's not necessarily incompatible, but it is consistent with the goals and policies in the comp plan and the future land use map. The 6th one, industrial zoning, that one there, they're not asking for that, so it really wouldn't be appropriate. So that kind of wraps up the zoning aspect of the proposal. Questions for me before I go into?
I have a question, and I apologize. I'm the new guy here. So you put up a map of the existing densities that are R1S. What is the allowed density in the R1 that's being requested? Is that 8250?
They're not requesting a specific density with the R1. They're just asking for the R1 zone for.
Which R1
but the
allows
minimum
for-
lot size in the R1
You're right.
is a 6,500 square foot lot.
So I wasn't sure what that would.
So from planning principles, a 6,500 square foot lot wouldn't necessarily be incompatible with a 14,000 or 20,000 square foot lot nearby or adjacent.
Or 8,000.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
John, have you talked to the developer, or have there been any conversations about a density restriction on R1 zone with a density restriction with the owner?
We hadn't gone down that path. I know that our code does allow for some conditional zoning aspects, but usually we do that through a PUD and would rather limit that aspect, because in tracking and that, that's why I think they were attracted to looking at running the subdivision concurrent with their proposal.
Sure. And I have a lot of appreciation for that, and one of the reasons I ask is that there's always the risk of the bait and switch, as in they get the zoning, let the subdivision expire, and then come back with something that actually meets the, that just falls within the 6,500 square foot. And so, in order to, this is one of those weird little parts of town or parts of our community where the city council seemed to make it pretty clear that they want it to be a little bit less dense. And so there's this kind of this ongoing little bit of a battle between, making it, a little bit dense, like a city density versus a county density. So I just wonder if, maybe I'll ask the applicant if they'd be okay with a density restriction.
Yeah, my only additional comment on that is probably in the next 10, 20 years, you'll see Prairie Avenue with significant traffic along that. And so what's that appropriate density next to a 5-lane road with ambulances, sirens, fire, light infiltration and pollution? and
Sure.
what effects that has on, do you still have a rural feel with a rural lotting pattern adjacent to Prairie? I get it as you proceed further away from Prairie, but as you get next to it, is there certain kind of buffering type of elements that you can get with density?
Don't get me wrong, I think it should be as dense as possible, but the
Right.
city council may not agree, and they haven't in the past, and so that's kind of why I wanted to bring it up, see if there's been any conversation.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, we'll move on.
So the subdivision that they're proposing to go along with this, as you see here, to get a better idea, in the disposition of this subdivision, I moved it so it kind of ran kind of off. The north arrow is actually, instead of heading up to the left and to the south, you see the Craftsman and Meadow Ridge adjacent to the south, which would be to the right. So this area does plan to have access. This would be probably the one access between Chase and McGuire, or Chase and Howell, sorry, between Chase and Howell, that you would have access to Prairie. And that's where you see it head south, and then you have connections that eventually, potentially, could go to adjacent subdivisions or development to the east or west. Not saying it's ever going to happen, but providing that allows for the evolution of kind of more master plan subdivisions as they come in 5-acre pieces. Their lot patterns, they don't plan, I apologize, I don't believe I got their minimum lot size on here. The applicant can clarify that, but they were above the minimum 6,500 that was required by code. They do plan on presenting a trail that's on the south side to connect with the multi-use trail within the Craftsman Meadows Ridge HOA. Within that plat, there was the pedestrian access easement that would allow that connection to that multi-use trail to the south. So the review criteria is the following, and there's 6 of them. First one is there provisions for water, a system adequate in terms of quantity quality for the subdivision being proposed? Like I said, East Green Acres, they provided a will serve letter. Sewage being provided, that we provide sewer service. In the staff report, you saw that we can provide connections to that. Proposed streets are consistent with the transportation elements of the comprehensive plan. On that, it would be able to meet that. They'd be providing the necessary improvements along Prairie Avenue, as well as meet our city code for their internal residential streets. That the next one deals with soil and topographical conditions presenting hazards. There are none. And the other one is probably the critical one, and you see in one of the conditions, is if the subdivision is zoned for the proposed use, and so subject to ultimately if the city council chose to approve this based off the recommendation by P&Z, your body, for the R1 zoning, if that's what you choose to recommend, then it would meet that condition. So if that all fell apart at council, then therefore there would be a result in a denial of the subdivision if that were to occur. Does that make sense?
Or if they came back later and decided they wanted to recommend something less dense than R1, that would also throw it off, right?
I believe they could reduce the number of lots, and it wouldn't necessarily have to come back. If they were to increase density beyond the underlying zoning, then that would default us into probably having to process a completely different procedural process, like a PUD, and look at open space and all that. But such that they stayed in the parameters of the underlying zoning and are decreasing lots, I think we'd be good. The next one deals with development paying for its fair share of costs and its impact on the city. This is done through impact fees. The 3 segments for residential development are public safety, streets, and parks. They pay a fee on their impact for growth, so that way you can mitigate their impact on the city. There were a couple conditions that were needed to be brought forward for your consideration that's outside of the norm. The applicant and staff agreed to modify their internal road accordingly. You see that 60-foot right-of-way And you can see here the sidewalk, and there's about a 1.5 foot overlap on both sides of the sidewalk. That's kind of a modification that they agreed to. You see the 10-foot planter swell strip here. So staff has proposed to add on 6 an internal 32-foot road section within the 60-foot right-of-way with adjoining 10-foot easements. That would be acceptable for city staff, that be clarified on the conditions. Additionally, we talked a little bit about the bait and switch with development. We wanted to add condition 13 that with that multi-use trail, that the 30-foot access easement that's shown in Exhibit A3 in the preliminary plan, that they maintain that pedestrian sidewalk connectivity and they add that multi-use trail and connect within Track D of the Craftsman and Meadow Ridge PUD subdivision. So that's an additional condition that staff would like you to consider as part of this proposal. Agencies routed is as you see here. Of those routed, only 2 responded. That would be the police, Post Falls Police and Kootenai County Fire, of which they both remain neutral on the proposal. Questions for staff on the subdivision?
The only entrance to this development would be right off of Prairie then?
Yes, at this point, that would be correct.
I have a question for you, Mr. Manley, and I apologize, Mr. Chairman Davis, for interrupting again.
You're fine.
In the staff report that I have, there's only 11 recommended conditions. What are conditions 12 and 13 in case others don't have it?
Okay, well, I apologize.
I'm just trying to
I'm
follow
working
along.
on,
I'm not
you'll
trying
see
to-
like on the next public hearing, it looks very similar to this. 13 should be 12.
Okay,
So that there is no missing 12.
there is, because I only have 11.
You have 11?
Yes.
Right, so I'm saying that 13 proposed here should be 12.
So that, it's not in here, but that would be 12 in this. Your staff
Yes.
report only has, I just wanted to make sure
Yeah,
I'm
so,
tracking them all.
so
Okay.
if you're looking at 11, that's because the next public hearing, which is Quiet Ridge, same developer, same group, they have the 12.
Right.
So then this would be the next preceding one following the conditions presented in the staff report.
Thank
That was
you.
the intent.
Oh, Not trying to,
Yeah,
on the
that's fine.
spot, I'm not real sharp, so I have a hard time following along, and so.
Yeah, I apologize
If I
for
get past 10, I have a hard
confusing
time
anything.
counting, so.
6 though is the same in both, so 6 should be good.
Okay. Any other questions?
All right.
No other questions for staff at this time? We'll go ahead and turn it over to applicant. Thank you, Mr. Manley.
Which one's yours? Where are we on yet? Okay, thank you, sir.
Got it.
I have the con. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gordon Dobler, Dobler Engineering, 1875 North Lakewood, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Yes, sir.
Let's get the show on the road. All right, 12-lot subdivision, you've seen that. Comp plan designation residential, you've seen that. No, nothing different there, but I am going to pause at this next one. There's your current zoning and land use. So let's have a fun discussion about the zoning, the R1 versus R1S. I appreciate John's comments on what the surrounding developments are. They're basically all one R1S PUD. So the city of Post Falls, and just bear with me, I know you know this, you have 2 zones for residential, well, 2 main ones, the R1S and then the R1. R1S is minimum 1 acre, R1 is 6,500. So if a guy wants something in between, there's basically 2 ways to get to it. You can get it zoned R1 and come in with a subdivision that has platted larger lots, which typically everybody's happy with, or you can do an R1S with the PUD, in which the Planning Commission approves something less than a 1 acre, and you've seen the results of that here. You've got an average at Craftsman Meadow of 13 or 14, a little over 14,300, and then the Arrowleaf, which was 8,000. So we're kind of stuck in that dilemma of, we want something that's more Craftsman Ridge, but here's the downside of the PUD is that it requires 10% open space. Well, for these smaller acreages, you end up with two things, two downsides. I suppose there's positive. First downside is you've got smaller open space area that ends up being almost, in my opinion, non-functional. You'll have your opinion. You could look and see, look at Arrowleaf, look at some of these other smaller ones. You end up with strips of land that may be used for this or that. But the result is you end up with smaller lots because, let's face it, you got to make this thing pencil. So there's the trade-off is, okay, we can give you open space, and then it's got to be maintained, smaller amounts, or our approach is, well, let's come in with an R1 and the subdivision that says, yeah, here's really what we want to do. We're willing to bring them both forward at the same time, get approvals. So it's a bit of a dilemma. I'm sure you've seen it before. That's the route. Commissioner Kimball makes a point of the bait and switch. I was personally crushed at that suggestion, but I'm over
I'm not
with that.
suggesting that you would.
No, I know. I completely understand. And in the end, there's some validity to say it's zoned R1. It is what it is. Planning Commission gets to approve whatever subdivision comes through. If it meets an R1, I suppose. Yeah, I get that. So there's the downside of the approach to coming in with an R1 zone and a subdivision. But I think that, obviously we wouldn't be here if we didn't believe this is the better path because, again, come back with a PUD, there's too many downsides, and I think less benefit to the community doing it that way. Do want to point out that we had some extensive meetings with the Craftsman Meadows people. And I'll get to a little bit more detail when we talk about the subdivision, but the intent was to mirror their subdivision and actually be annexed into their HOA. And we have a signed MOU with the homeowners association that says, yes, we will annex you into the HOA if you do X, Y, and Z. And there are conditions in that, and I know that's outside of the purview, but I think it's important information for the Planning Commission to know. There's conditions in that HOA or in that MOU that specify minimum lot size. Anyway, information, we met with them. Again, I want to convey to you a sense of a commitment to, yes, we're going forward with this. Yes, these are our minimum lot sizes, and that's what we're going to do. Not really sure what Commissioner Kimball talked about. I'm curious to discuss that at the appropriate time.
Mr. Dobler?
Yes, sir.
Just to kind of dovetail into that so I have an understanding of where you might be or your client might be. I think your subdivision plan has a 2.46 units per acre, if I read it right.
I think that's about right.
Something like that. Would you be opposed to capping the density, a condition that caps a zoning or an annexation agreement that has a maximum zone of 2.5 units per acre?
So before I answer that, how does that process work? How do you do that? Where does that condition live, and how is it carried forward? I have too much experience on the other end of it not to ask those questions.
I know you do. It's been done in the past in Post Falls, and it seems to end up in the annexation agreement.
So I had a bad experience with that, Berkshire. And I'm not saying let's don't do it. I guess I'm kind of diving into it and saying, yikes, that one came back to bite because it was approved in 2007. It got lost in an annexation agreement. And
I guess it kind of comes down to if we're going to guarantee that there's a 2.5 unit per acre density or less, then if this whole thing dies on the vine tomorrow because the market tanks or whatever, then and the annexation goes through, then it at least gives the surrounding neighborhoods an understanding that hey, whoa, bring it up at public hearings and future subdivisions. That, I mean, that's what it's for, right? It's what public hearings are for people to bring
Yeah.
that kind of stuff up.
You bet.
Make sure that we're following the letter of the law. And that's kind of where I was.
Is that, okay, forgive me, is that legal? I mean, can you really stick a zoning in an annexation agreement that basically takes it out of the planning commission's hands forever? Because the only people that can change the annexation agreement is the council, and that's what we discovered with Berkshire. And that, I mean, Warren and John and I sat down and said, you know what, I don't know the answer to that, but here we are, and here it is, and we have to move forward. But that raised some serious questions to say, is that even legal? Because you basically set the zoning through the annexation agreement. Anyway, I don't want to get too far off, but it really raised those questions. So let me back up and say, you know what, we have no problem with a density cap if there was a way to move forward with it at all, because this is what we're going to do, we're going to move forward and blah, blah, blah. I get that, yeah, the owner could win the lottery or, God forbid, other things. I get all that. But I think the zoning in the annexation agreement, just from what we went through on Berkshire, raised enough questions to say, is there another way to get to that end? I don't know the answer to that tonight, Commissioner, but I guess I would just say we're certainly not opposed to limiting the number of lots or some other thing like that.
Mr. Cafferty, do you want to address that now, or do you want to let the applicant wrap up and then come back to it?
Well, I'm here at your pleasure, Mr. Chairman.
You want to go? I'll go ahead and let you wrap up, and then maybe we'll come back and address
Okay,
that.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
So here we have it, R1, site area is 4.8, proposed lots, dwelling units, as Commissioner Kimball remembered correctly, 2.46. Our minimum lot size is 10.8, median is 12, and you can read the number, 17 is the largest, and that's around the existing home, which is on lot 6, I believe. There's an existing home there. Again, the average lot size at Craftsman was 14. I calculated 388 versus 376, but it's probably a rounding error. That was kind of a joke. Okay. Engineering humor, what can I say? Traffic, again, let me just take a minute to explain what we did with the subdivision. So I'm pretty much past the annexation part of it. Staff did a good job of making the findings. We believe that annexation is, beneficial, blah, blah, blah. So traffic, we're going to generate 114 trips a day exactly. Teasing again. Yeah. By the ITE trip generation, that translates to 10 trips where we are restricted to access onto Prairie, and it's ultimately going to be 5 lanes. It certainly can handle that. We did explore access into the Craftsman to Hydrilla, because ultimately Prairie wants to have limited access and it'll be crowded. It's not a great place to access, but that's our legal access now. Anyway, the homeowners were not in favor of that by any means, and that's understandable. You can see to have a street that comes down and dumps right in there as a T intersection. These homeowners weren't wild about it. So we ended up with, in the MOU, water and sewer coming from Hydrilla across this. There's an open space tract right here, and I think John was pointing out in the staff report is the wording of that open space tract does allow for pedestrian access. So we had always intended to extend that pedestrian access down to Hydrilla. So that's compatible, and I appreciate staff picking that up in the condition. Anyway, I wanted to let you know that we had several meetings with the Homeowners Association, which were productive. Ended up in the signed MOU, which does allow 30-foot easement across the open space tract for water and sewer, making this, the extension of utilities, a lot simpler. There's the utilities you can see. There's where our connection point will be. There's also water. East Green Acres has water, and they preferred the water connection to come from Hydrilla also. I think that's it. I think I said everything I needed to say. So I'd stand for any questions.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Kind of beat it to death. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Cafferty, do you want to address the question of legality of CAP?
So it is acceptable to, so let me back up. As you know, you're here tonight on 4 different requests, all of which are annexations that will go to the city council for their decision, but you are sitting here tonight on all of them and to determine what the initial zoning will be. But you're not actually getting the authority to determine that. You get to make a recommendation. So the fact that the city council would make the determination on the zoning and include that in the annexation agreement would not be in violation of any of the requirements. I would agree, as Mr. Dobler pointed out, though, that it does create some bit of a challenge where you zone it one thing and then in the annexation agreement generally require a high or lesser density. How do you change that? In theory, what you do is go through the annexation agreement and modify that at some later date. That can be cumbersome. But I think that's the only way you can do it unless, and you could, when you make your recommendation to the council, make that recommendation, but allow for language within the annexation agreement to say that that could be modified through a zone change instead of modifying the annexation agreement. I think that could be in the agreement itself, because it's a contract is what an annexation agreement is, and the parties can agree to that. And so they could allow it to be modified through a zone change as opposed to having to modify the annexation agreement and the process that's required through that.
Okay.
But is it legal? Yes, you can do it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Public comment. We do have one individual who does wish to speak that is neutral, Daniel Finley. Mr. Finley, I believe you are familiar with the routine, so I'll have you state your name, address, and then you have 4 minutes.
I'm somewhat familiar with the routine, but not with the machine. Is there a way I can...
Mr. Pulse will take care of there.
So...
Name and address.
Name Daniel Finley, resident of Post Falls. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Normally when people come to speak, at least when I come and I hear them speak, they're either pretty upset at you or they have a problem without a solution. And I'd like to start off recognizing that you all here, and Mr. Manley and the others, have a very difficult job of tailoring a suit to a growing body. And I think sometimes the tools you have at your disposal are not precise enough for that task. So, for instance, if you take a look at, I put together a map of the future land use for Rathdrum, Post Falls, Hayden, and Coeur d'Alene, and apologize for how poor the quality is. But basically, if you look at it, that's the Rathdrum Prairie between the 4 cities, and it's all zoned residential. It's all zoned. It's basically all gone by 2030 by the city's own estimation. And everything in this process has been done legally, and it's good to see that there's a lot of attention shown toward what is legal and not legal, and concern over agreements in an annexation process that wouldn't be subject to a public hearing. That's kind of a concern for people like me to hear. But I think you're working with criteria that ultimately, cuff you to that future for the prairie that I doubt very many people in Post Falls actually want. During the last city council meeting on December 3rd, they were talking about the Idaho veneer mill site, trying to zone that as SC5, which the smart code is great. Props to the city for putting that in against a lot of opposition. But they said that that was probably the only spot in our city where we could zone SC5, which to me, if you look at how much land there is in the city, that seems kind of ridiculous, because that's a tool that's more precise than R1 or R1S. That's a place where you can develop other local destinations that aren't in downtown. If you look at the proposed site right here, it's right next to the Crown Point development and a lot of other high-density areas. You don't really want all those people to commute to your revitalized downtown area because the infrastructure that you can improve on won't support it. You need to have other local destinations that don't just swallow the prairie up into, houses. SC5, SC4, those kinds of higher density zonings in places where we know there's going to be major arterials, 5-way lane, on road on Prairie, I think is not in the criteria. It's not something you can zone for based on the current comprehensive plan. But I would ask my fellow citizen commissioners to consider that kind of radical change to the current comprehensive plan. The way we have it now, there's a lot of inconsistencies. We have this walkway and this pedestrian walkway going into this development. Walkway to where? Presumably it's for the people that are living in that neighborhood, but I've heard in other meetings that you want Post Falls to be a walkable environment. No one's going to walk from Crown Point down to the downtown because it's 3 miles, 3 or 4 miles. Very few people will bike there. If you want to have a truly walkable town with that small town feel, there has to be space for SC5-like zoning with high-density residential areas combined with a commercial on the ground floor. And I know it's not on the radar, and I know it's very unpopular. People don't like upzoning, but I think that is the way you can tailor the suit to fit the body, because the current tools you have just are too clumsy. And you see it right here. It's just going to be a sea of houses next to high density, low density. Either way, there's no destination there for the people that do live there to go to, and on foot or on a bicycle. So I just would like to raise that concern for the criteria have kind of doomed you to make what I think are poor decisions in the long run, 20, 30 years down the road, even if they are completely legal and done with the kind of care and concern we all like to see from our public servants. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Point of clarification.
Yes.
Chairman, because I know I like to hear my own voice, so I figured you
Please.
must as well.
We do too.
There will be another public hearing at the annexation with the City Council, just to clarify for the audience. I'm sure all of you know that.
Right. Perfect. Okay, more opportunities. I appreciate that. Neutral, I don't believe that we have any need for rebuttal at this time. Does the applicant feel okay? Any questions for staff, applicant, engineering, anyone else at this time? Are we good? Okay, look for a motion to close this hearing then.
Move to close the hearing?
Second.
Okay, motion and second. Which brings us to the last of the evening. We go from Tranquil Meadows to Quiet Ridge Annexation. Mr. Manley to present.
So yes, thematically, this is very similar to the last presentation. It's in a very similar area, so we'll have a lot of similar dialogue as we go through this. Size and the proposition is a little bit different, though. So you're being asked as a commission to review the annexation of approximately 18.4 acres of a potential R1 zoning designation, and to make that recommendation to City Council. The subdivision, though, is being asked for only 9.9 acres of the proposed annexed area for about 26 R1 zone lots, and I'll go into further detail as it gets presented. Before I forget, the annexation case file for this is ANNX 15/2019, and the subdivision is the SUBD 19/2019. The owners for this is a group of owners. It's Ryan Stoker, the Coca Land LLC, and Dave Fair, with the applicant being Dobler Engineering, who will be speaking on their behalf. Project location is as you see here. It's directly to the southwest of the intersection of Prairie and Chase Road, Prairie being a principal arterial, Chase being the minor arterial. You can see in the vicinity the large 5-acre lots that are currently in the county, as well as the smaller developed lots that are currently in the city of Post Falls. Parcel information, as you see here, it's mostly large lot residential homes in Kootenai County. There's no significant topology or vegetation issues with this project. Water would be provided by East Green Acres, with sewer being provided by the city of Post Falls. Here's where you look at the surrounding zoning. It's very similar to past discussions on the previous hearing where you have the R1S to the southwest, and to the east you got the R1 and Smart Code, which is the purple. Once again, same image same discussion points about the PUD and the smaller lots that's within the PUD, as well as the R1 that's to the east, south of Prairie Avenue, and Smart Code, which is that purple. Well, you see that dark purple, that's actually multifamily or higher density single family, and the lighter purple and Smart Code is your like typical single family lot development. So looking at the review criteria for zoning, it's the same ones as before. Is it consistent with the future land use map? Consistent with the goals and policies found in the comp plan? Looking at the street classifications, traffic patterns, existing development, future land uses, community plans, and geographic natural features. There are no specific community plans or geographical natural features that would give guidance or impedance in the proposal. Now going into the future land use, looking at this, it is all designated as residential in the future land use. The proposal would be consistent with that. Looking at the project location, the proposed R1 designation wouldn't be incompatible with the nearby existing uses of the large lot, 5-acre tracts that are in the county, nor the smaller lots about, compared to 5 acres, about 14,000 in the R1S and or typical R1 lots that are to the east of Chase Road. There is a church on the southeast corner of the intersection of Chase and Prairie. What I did want to add, though, to this public hearing, which I didn't find necessarily 100% germane to the last public hearing, and it's really not a basis of this, but I did want to go over more of for an educational purpose of where we're going with the our comp plan that we currently have and the proposed future land uses. What you see here is planned commercial activity nodes and some neighborhood activity nodes. And we actually went into some discretion of looking at low density, medium density, and high density, planning for areas suitable for different density spectrums, rather than having one residential designation and not really necessarily know where what goes where without as much guidance. On a similar vein, we bisected Post Falls into quadrants, would offer in this area, which is right here, the Central Prairie area. So we're looking at this area. There's currently some guiding focus points that came out of a public process, interest of growth and specifying growth, asking for some more guidance compatible with our infrastructure and goals within that comp plan. So for here you can see focus multifamily along Prairie Avenue, focus commercial development along Prairie Avenue and near identified commercial nodes, hence the previous map that you saw on the comp plan, and focus provisions for a variety of housing types and densities, and to focus provisions of commercial uses along arterial collector streets and areas of high traffic volumes. And where this kind of comes into play is you look at here in green. This is a recent assessment of population. This is the same area of that Central Prairie area, and there's currently about 9,300 people that reside in this area, both in the county and the city. That's larger than some of our nearby towns and cities, small towns. And in the next 20 years, that may double. So we could end up with 20,000 people that reside within this region. You have Highway 41 that's projected to have increased commercial growth and commercial opportunities. Similarly, you got Celtice Way and Mullen Avenue to the south. The intent of those nodes is to provide relief to the intersections of along Highway 41 and to the infrastructure along those, because each single-family home adds about 10 trips a day, and each multifamily is about 7. So cumulatively, you'd be putting a lot of daily trips off to the east or to the south that, without some other services located within this region, are then providing wear and tear, long-term O&M, and other sort of mitigating forces along those corridors. So the thought of, through the planning process of the comp plan, is defining areas that may be suitable for potential commercial neighborhood development type activities to help mitigate that long-term impact of growth on Post Falls. Hence, this area, which you see at this location, is right there. Suitable for some higher intense uses other than R1. And I'm just bringing that forward as part of the review criteria because it dovetails into, as you look at the street classifications, traffic patterns, existing development, future land use, what zoning should be appropriate at this as they're requesting R1. You also look at our current zone criteria. This is commercial and high-density residential zoning is typically assigned along streets with higher road classifications. So with Prairie Avenue being a principal arterial and it's adjacent to a minor arterial, a higher land use classification would be appropriate at a location similar to this. The next one being limited or neighborhood commercial and lower density residential zoning is typically assigned for properties as they proceed further away from higher intense urban activity. Currently, yes, Southeast Way is our commercial corridor and our urban corridor that runs the length of the city, and so is Highway 41. Looking long-term, though, is this in the best interest and is this consistent with potential future plans? But as of now, it is further away from our intense urban activity areas, and the proposed R1 would be consistent with that criteria. The sixth one is industrial zoning, and they're not asking that, so there really is, that's not an appropriate to assess with their request. That kind of wraps up staff's introduction on zoning. It's a little convoluted. I apologize for that, but I think there's some points that as for a planning division we wanted to bring forward pertinent to this request.
Question for staff?
Yeah, do you know what part of this is being proposed for the subdivision? I know the annexing.
That would be right here. So you see the proposed subdivision. What I did here is provide the area for the subdivision and the remaining portion outside of the subdivision that's directly adjacent to Prairie and Chase Road, the 8.5 acres, would remain undeveloped outside of that proposed subdivision area. And it does currently have a residence or two on it.
So where's an exit street?
So the exit street on this, and you see why it's 26 lots, is because fire department has a trigger. If I think it's over 30 lots, you got to have 2 exits out. So they're at 26. So they really only need 1 point at this point in time. So that would be to the southwest of their proposed subdivision. They would go into Craftsman and Meadow Ridge and then out this way so they could get out to Fisher Avenue. And then Fisher connects to Howell and to Chase.
So both are one, but they're just showing subdivision on one portion of it. They're actually only showing the subdivision on one portion of it, and the rest they're just leaving as a blank canvas for R1 for later?
Yes, someday down the road, we'd still have to meet the subdivision process and bring a subdivision per city code, whatever it is at that time.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions for staff?
Did the airport comment?
Did the airport comment? No, they didn't at this location. I believe if it was northeast of 41 and Prairie, they probably would have.
Okay.
I know I've had conversations with the airport when they were developing their master plan. This was never identified as an area of concern for them.
Okay.
Okay. No other questions? Thank you, Mr. Manley. Applicant.
Still need to go over the subdivision.
Oh, sorry.
I just wrapped up the zoning part.
I jumped.
That's good enough. So, subdivision aspect of it, as you see here, the 26 lots. We've kind of just gone over the connectivity part of it. All lots are planned to be greater than the minimum lot for the R1 zoning. You do see these 20-foot access easements, a pedestrian to the north and to the south. Looking at the review criteria, when it comes to water, you saw the Wilsert letter from East Green Acres. They can meet the first one. The city can provide sewer. It goes into detail in your staff report regarding those measures. As far as the transportation elements of the comprehensive plan, they plan on doing the appropriate improvements adjacent to Prairie Avenue with development. You look at, and where needed, looking at the fourth one deals with any sort of topographical or soil conditions presenting hazards. There are none on this. Looking at the proposed zoning, it goes back to the other one. It's all contingent upon ultimate decision by city council, and you see that condition that if it gets rejected, then it would then negatively affect the proposed subdivision. They could then have the right to propose a different subdivision down the road consistent with the proposed zoning. But this one would have to be revised. This one right here is the sixth criteria, deals with the level of service and mitigating measures for growth and with development. This is done with impact fees, and as stated in the previous, their proportion at their fee goes to parks, public safety, and streets. Similar to the last one, similar cross-section that was reviewed. You see the similar number 6 that deals with the road cross-section in the 60-foot right-of-way, a proposed condition. This one here, though, 13 is actually 13 because there is a 12 on Quiet Ridge. So this one right here, you see a little bit different, though. The other one was within a 30-foot easement. This is within a 20-foot easements that's within that preliminary plat. So they would construct those connectivity trails to the north and to the what would be a Tract A to they'd have a trail connecting to Tract A within the Craftsman of Meadow Ridge. There's no trail at Tract A, so there's no language to connect the trail to another trail at this time. You see the agencies routed of that, Post Falls Police Department and Kootenai County Fire, both commented and they remain neutral on the proposal. So this would wrap up staff's presentation on both the zoning part of annexation and the subdivision.
Any questions for staff on annexation or subdivision? Still. Oh, good. Okay. Mr. Manley, thank
Right,
you.
thanks.
I believe at this time, applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Commission, Gordon Dobler, Dobler Engineering, 1875 North Lakewood, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Pretty much the same discussions. Let's pause at this slide because I want to talk a little bit about zoning again. Let's beat that dead horse. So yes, we are only coming in while we're coming in for annexation on the larger piece that you saw in John's slide. We're only subdividing 10 acres, which presents a little bit of unique situation when it comes to zoning and the discussion we previously had. So it's a given that we will move forward, assuming that it gets approved, annexed with the subdivision as we have proposed. But the discussion of, what did you call it? Zoning by annexation agreement, whatever that term is, would be probably more critical because frankly, this remaining 8 acres, you know, we came in with an R1, we discussed commercial with staff, there's that possibility, multifamily, and there's a couple of considerations when development of this remaining piece comes forward. Not the least of which is this corner and access to the roundabout. So access is going to be pretty well restricted because of coming in and out of a roundabout is difficult at best. You have to have it outside of your splitter island, pedestrian access, blah, blah, blah. So it gets problematic up in this area. And in this corner, you've got 2 roads now that require fairly large rights-of-way. So what happens is this piece gets shrunk down substantially. So to develop this with residential, I don't think we could do it at the same density that we're doing this one. In fact, I know we can't because I laid it out for my client and for the property owner to see what would even be possible, and it's a higher density than what we have. So I guess I could sum up by saying as we move forward, we should be deliberate because there's a good possibility, even with an R1 zone with no density restriction on this piece here, that it would come back for a rezone. Especially after discussion that, Mr. Manley just had, and that, there's other considerations. This wants to be a good commercial node. We wouldn't oppose it, but access is critical to commercial if it wants to go on this corner. They need to have access to both of these streets pretty much directly, or else it's not going to be attractive for a commercial use. Multifamily, it's probably a high possibility, at least up in this corner and through here. So we're coming in with an R1, but no, only because we have to come in with something, and that was probably a 60% probability versus something less than 50%. So keep that in mind as you deliberate and maybe even discuss, zoning by annexation agreement. I would comment on that and say I do appreciate attorney's perspective on that, and would, at least my 2 cents is, one of the difficulties we ran into with Berkshire, the wording, there was no exception. So I would applaud the inclusion of some language that says a rezone would be accomplished through, a regular rezone process. No, I don't think we would have any issue with that, or the landowner would. That's how it would normally happen. So that's my 2 cents on that. Good discussion, though. I mean, these are sticky issues, especially with really just the 2 zones that we have to work with, the R1 and the R1S. You've seen this. There's the comp plan. It's residential. There's the property. There's the existing land use. You're familiar with that. I have nothing to add. Here's the layout. And before I get too far away on that, how do you go back on this thing? Back to one of my previous slides.
Like to the same PowerPoint?
Yes?
You can just take this and go like that. I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Can you go back? What button were you pushing?
This left one.
There. Okay, so I didn't say a whole lot on the previous one, but now's a good time. And I'll page forward to the subdivision layout. But you can see there's Arrowleaf, here's Tranquil, here's Quiet Ridge. So we really pretty much checkerboarded it. So coming in with these two subdivisions and annexation allowed us the opportunity to somewhat master plan at least the street layout for this whole area, because they're all going to be 5-acre pieces. So what you see in the street layout, I actually put together a fun little master plan, at least conceptual, to say, as this goes forward, what kind of a street arrangement makes the most sense. And we can stand here now at this point in time and say it makes sense. But you have to start somewhere. We weren't, and staff too, we weren't just going to throw something on the board and say, yeah, that works. So I went to the trouble of, laying out possible alignments, with the same kind of lot sizes we're looking at, but at least having a layout. So now as I page forward, if you remember Tranquil, we access here and come over here to extend and match what was already platted and being built with Arrowleaf. So that street would conceivably come across. When this 5 acres comes in, I'm assuming Planning Commission would want those two connected, and it was laid out with that intent. Again, coming up here, that's going to tie into the street you'll see here in a second on Quiet Ridge that extends this way. So it was intended that these two would connect, and then this would possibly be a cul-de-sac. Again, it's difficult to know all of the variables, but we wanted to at least start with a skeleton that Planning Commission and staff could grow on, something that was doable. So then what you'll see with Quiet Ridge is 2 streets that stub out this way with the intent of coming down parallel and connecting at some point to Chase. Code's got a 500-foot spacing requirement on your major collectors. That ends up being down in here somewhere, but at least we've laid it out so you're going to have connectivity. And again, the fire code restriction, if these were to develop, there has to be a second access because we're close to the limit of the 26 lots on Quiet Ridge off of Foxtail. So if these develop, there's going to have to be an access out to Chase. So you kill two birds with one stone. So there you see what the intent was. These would loop through the adjacent and come down. Some of the details you've seen, 26, 9.56 for a 2.6 DU per acre on this piece. Again, that number on the other piece is probably not real attractive. Minimum lot sizes, again, compatible with the other subdivision we proposed, compatible with the subdivisions to the South Craftsman in particular. We've provided pedestrian connectivity. Again, in the context of discussions with the Craftsman Meadow HOA, we're planning on annexing into them. This allows access to that open space to the south. Do I need to flip back there so you can see that? Besides, I want to play with the toy too. So there you go. This is their open space tract that was dedicated with Craftsman, and that, yeah, this is it right here. So our subdivision would allow access down to it via that, the one pedestrian access I have. And that was the intent of it. It wasn't just kind of a rogue thought, but it actually was planned. There you go. Okay, traffic, just some numbers, 247 20 trips. Obviously, it all has to go out through Foxtail. We discussed that with the Craftsman HOA. You know, to their credit, they weren't wild about it, but we didn't really have much choice. There's no way to get a second access out at this point, but we have planned for 3 future access. This one would go out to Prairie, so I'm showing the future plan and how traffic would flow in the future. There you go. Again, same point. Here's future traffic flow. There's current. I'll say obviously, people all drive a little different, but we believe the majority of traffic will get to Fisher as quick as they can and then out to Chase or over to Howell. Again, discussed that with the HOA. They weren't wild about it, especially the people that live along there, but you know, traffic at, well, I think I had 20 trips in the peak hour roughly. It's not horrible, but there's really not much choice at this point. Utilities, we've talked about that. Utilities all come off of Foxtail, water and sewer up into the subdivision, then extended along those roads for future development. And that concludes my presentation.
Questions for the applicant?
One really quick one with regards to temporary turnarounds for those substreets. Do you have plans for those?
The temporary turnarounds we propose to the fire district and staff that we would use, you don't need much of it, but we would use the entrance into these pedestrian accesses that they would be paved at minimum fire width. Okay. Well, actually, minimum fire is 12, but we're going to pave it a little bit bigger than that just so they could accommodate it. But that's where that gets solved.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good point.
Any other questions?
No.
No, I think we're good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Questions for staff? Anything else? No? Okay. For motion to close?
Any public
Public comment?
Yeah.
Public comment?
None.
Sorry, I looked at Amber. She didn't have any paperwork whatsoever.
To make the record.
Seeing no public comment, either for, neutral, or against, I would look for a motion to close the hearing at this time.
I move to close the hearing on the Quiet Ridge annexation.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we'll close that out. So we will reconvene on that particular piece at a later date to render recommendations to move on to City Council. Brings us to item number 5 this evening, and that is new business. Mr. Manley, is there any new business to cover?
There's none.
Administrative staff reports.
There's none either.
None whatsoever. Commissioner comments, anything for the good of the order?
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to everyone. Like to welcome Mr. Cafferty back.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Glad to have you. Anything else? Okay, look for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.